Hello, today is Monday, November 11th, 2019. I'm Joe Schmidt from TC2, and this is Staying Connected. Today's podcast is part 2 of our podcast where I'm talking with my TC2 colleagues, Theresa and Knutson and Julie Gardner. They are the leaders of TC2's contract compliance and optimization practice. We're going to continue our discussion about some of the challenges faced by enterprise users when trying to manage transport expenses. On our last podcast, Theresa and Julie described the issue of credits sitting on company bills, going unused or being used in a, let's say, less than optimal way because the AP and TEM process for utilizing the credits is lacking rigor. Okay, thanks again, Theresa and Julie, for joining me. Theresa, let me start with you. In addition to the credit issue we discussed, I know that another changing factor that we see is the length of time that the billing dispute takes to get resolved.
Hi, Joe, and thanks. It's good to be back. Yeah, historically, billing issues took no more than 3 or 4 months to resolve, and they were handled directly by your assigned account team. That was great because those were the days when you had account teams that were often fully or at least partially dedicated to supporting you. So depending on your size, that varied. The account teams, they knew you, they knew your company, and most importantly, they knew your contract-specific terms and conditions, so they knew how far back to calculate credits related to billing disputes.
Right. So back in the good old days, that 3 to 4 months that Theresa mentioned, it's now grown anywhere from 6 months to 2 years and sometimes longer to resolve a billing dispute depending upon the size and the nature of the dispute in question. The time frame's lengthened for a couple of reasons. One is the process. Customers are now directed to file their disputes via the online billing portal. Now, those portals are great, but you've got to input very specific information, which routes the disputes to a billing rep who has very limited knowledge of your contract. So it's not the dedicated representation that you had previously that Theresa mentioned. What's happening now, we continue to see billing tickets closed out prematurely with an email that provides you with no follow-up point of contact. The reasons that the ticket is closed are often confusing or incorrect. Part of this is the loss of your dedicated billing support that Theresa mentioned again, and part of it is the increased scrutiny within the vendor billing department. The billing reps are under pressure to close their tickets quickly and to limit the refunds they give back to you. And they are measured on their ability to do just that.
So I'm curious, Theresa, do you see customers having to reopen billing tickets on the same issue?
Yeah, and it's really ironic that sometimes it can happen 2 or 3 times before you actually get to resolution. So once you do reach agreement on a credit related to a billing dispute, then there's a secondary process. It's an ever-expanding approval process that we see at all of our vendors, especially if you have credits due that are of significant size. So typically anything in the 6-figure arena has a lot of scrutiny around it. Verizon has a specific credit review committee. They call it the CRC, and they must secure approvals for different credit levels. AT&T has its own process, complete with a checklist that literally asks the billing rep to document how many times she or he attempted to sustain or deny the claim. So there's quite a gauntlet to go through in order to get a credit.
It sounds like enterprises generally are just having to wait longer for credits. So once a claim is filed and the parties agree with the dispute, what else can go wrong?
It's just the list goes on and on. But once you've gotten all parties to agree that there is a dispute and it's legitimate, you then have to calculate the resulting credit. So the time frame that the credit runs from depends on your specific contract. Worst case, you can go back 6 months from the date that you first raised the dispute, and you should make sure you have this date documented. So the example we gave is you open up a ticket about a dispute. It gets closed 2 or 3 times before it's finalized. Make sure you document that date that the initial dispute was raised. If you're lucky enough to have a highly negotiated contract, you actually could go back up to 2 years from the date a dispute was raised. So I'm going to give you an example. If it takes 8 months to resolve a billing issue and your contract allows you to go back 6 months from the date the dispute was raised, resulting credit should be for a total of 14 months. If you have a TEM provider, ask them to provide you a report of all open disputes that are over 6 months old and still unresolved because you may need to get involved in order to aid in the resolution.
Right, and you should always ask for and review a copy of the credit calculation. They're frequently, actually I would say almost always incorrect. Typically, the vendors will use the service guide recovery of 6 months instead of what your contract says. As Theresa mentioned, you may have language that is more negotiated, something more like 2 years. They're almost always going to use that 6-month time frame. And also, they'll rarely use the date you filed the dispute as the starting point. That's why it's so important to document that date along with your dispute tracking number. So each time you have to refile the dispute, if it's closed prematurely, document each of those new tracking numbers, and you'll want to reference those as you update the dispute, making sure that you reference back to the initial dispute that you filed. You need to check the math and the recovery period on any credit. The carriers are not going to give you generally the credit calculations. They're just going to tell you the number. So make sure you get a copy of that calculation, you review it, make sure it's complete, and then you also want to make sure that the credits include all of the applicable taxes and regulatory surcharges. This is very significant given that USF is now at 25%. So if you have a $100,000 credit for, say, an Ethernet access circuit, you need to expect a final after-tax, after-reg fee credit of about $135,000. So about a 35% incremental add onto the credit for those taxes and regulatory fees. Making sure that your credit is complete and includes your taxes and reg charges is so important.
You two work in this business every day, so do you see other opportunities for savings?
Yeah, we have one more we want to talk about, and it really relates to the type of companies we deal with, which are large enterprise companies. And most companies that we're working with are somewhere on the transformation spectrum for network services. They might be implementing SIP, maybe it's SD-WAN or Internet first. So when you're doing a migration of network services, it's critical to your business case to make sure that once the new services are installed, accepted, and working, that all of the old services are disconnected. And this is an issue we also see frequently at our clients, even some of the most sophisticated.
That's so true. And really, you can run reports from your vendor portal, and if you're using a TIM from your TIM system, to check the services billing at each of your locations. This can be very telling. Don't forget to disconnect the less obvious services like your CLEC PRIs, your BRIs, TDM features, now that you've migrated over to SIP, those POTS and Centrex lines, other old legacy ILEC and CLEC services. Just like with your billing disputes, you need to keep good records on all of your disconnect requests and make sure that your disconnects happen on time. It's very common when you're doing a large-scale cleanup for some disconnects to be processed and others just simply to be missed. So make sure you check, make sure that they've dropped off your billing.
Okay, we are about out of time, but do the two of you have any final advice?
Yeah, I'd like to recommend to my clients to include an agenda topic as part of your normal monthly or quarterly meeting, both with your TEM and your underlying transport vendors, to cover unapplied credits and open billing disputes. This will ensure that you have adequate visibility to outstanding issues that are over a certain threshold of dollar amount or a length of time that the dispute has been outstanding. I recommend, anything that's taking more than 6 months to be resolved should be escalated. And if you're at the point where you're going to the market in a competitive procurement or RFP process, make sure to address this ever-lengthening time frame to get billing issues resolved in your RFP and seek for a set period of time before contractual escalation procedures are available to you, and that will help shorten that time frame to resolve disputes.
Yes, and also management and monitoring of your credits and disputes will not only deliver savings, it's going to help you to more accurately forecast your network expenses. Likewise, making sure you close the loop on your transformation activities to ensure those disconnects happen on time, that's going to help you ensure your budgets stay on track. That's vitally important to all of the enterprises we work with, especially during this budget season.
That's great advice. Thanks, Julie, and thank you, Theresa. As you've heard today and on the Part 1 podcast, billing issues continue to be an issue for enterprises, and your service provider is punting the problem to you. If these podcasts have you wondering if maybe you have some of these billing issues and you'd like to discuss them with us, you can contact Julie, Theresa, me, or any of our TC2 and LB3 colleagues by giving us a call or sending us an email. If you'd like to stay current, you can subscribe to Staying Connected on a number of platforms like Google Play, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, and Spotify. And we also encourage you to check out our new websites at TC2 and LB3, and please follow us on LinkedIn.